Villains. We hate to love them, and we love to hate them. Their presence can be the best part of whatever work of fiction they inhabit, whether it's due to compelling writing or an emotional performance, or hammy, scene-devouring melodrama. Now, I've talked about villains in a previous video which revolved around discussing which ones qualify as irredeemable, but in this one, I want to talk about a completely different aspect of villainy. I want to talk about pettiness. Now, what exactly do I mean by that? Well, there is a percentage of villains in fiction whose goals and motivations are solely rooted in pettiness. No matter how grand or all-encompassing their machinations may be, it all goes back to the most insignificant slight. Now, depending on who you ask, this can be a good thing or a bad thing, but for me personally, I find it to be utterly hilarious and sometimes downright terrifying.
You embarrassed me. Embarrassed me in front of her.
For example, I give you David, the unluckiest man in the Marvel Universe. Why is he unlucky? Because for no reason whatsoever, Thanos, the omnicidal mad titan and on-again off-again lover of death itself, visits him every year on his birthday. And what does he do every time he visits? He ruins his life. It's dumb, it's stupid, and it's not really in character, but damn it, it's freaking hilarious and I love every bit of it. But that's just one example, and there are a lot more to come. But first, let's do a little deconstruction of the actual concept of pettiness in application to villainy. You see, when a villain is petty, it's equal parts obsession and ego. Those are usually the root causes of their actions. Their obsession with something, which usually turns out to be a single individual, ultimately distills itself as a need to prove that they aren't inferior. This feeds their ego, which stokes that obsession by affirming the thought that they are indeed superior. Basically, the reason someone like the Riddler keeps bugging Batman with riddle me this and riddle me that is because he wants to prove himself intellectually superior, and his ego acts as a subconscious validation of that fact. In essence, he's killing people and causing property damage to prove he's the smartest smarty in the packet. He wants, no, needs everyone to admit that fact, and that is pure pettiness. Jealousy is another motivator for pettiness. You see it more prominently in villains that fall under what I like to call the syndrome effect. Characters like Aldrich Killian in Iron Man 3, Riddler in Batman Forever, Mysterio in Far From Home, and of course, the man himself, Buddy.
My name is not Buddy!
These spurned and bitter losers used their intellect to achieve power and now seek to take revenge on the people in the past that didn't give them the time of day. All that potential, all that promise, and they wasted on vendettas because their senpai didn't notice them. Envy and obsession, ego and inferiority. These are what make up the basis of most petty acts. Of course, there are a small percentage of villains who are just petty for petty's sake. They have no tearjerker backstory or psychological justification for what they do. They are factually, unequivocally, mathematically pricks. Plain and simple. Like Darth Sidious in Star Wars,
Do it.
Majora in Majora's Mask, Skeletor in He-Man, and Aku in Samurai Jack.
Ha ha, poor samurai.
Now, the justification behind a villain's pettiness is only one side of the coin. The other is the actual act. Usually those acts fall into two categories: significant cause with an insignificant effect, and insignificant cause with a significant effect. For example, Dr. Doofenshmirtz from Phineas and Ferb had a truly awful childhood. I mean, his own parents didn't show up for his birth. That's Olympic gold medal winning levels of neglect. And yet, most of his schemes are just to remove inconveniences from his path or get petty revenge on others. This is the man that built an Oneida to cover his brother in bird poop. Petty, but not world-endingly petty. That's where the other category comes in. Doing truly disproportionately insane things because of the most insignificant of slights. An example of this would be Seto Kaiba from Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, it's pretty much known that Kaiba has an ego the size of his Blue Eyes white jet plane, but in the most recent Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie, it's taken even further. Kaiba still isn't over the fact that he never beat the Pharaoh in a duel, so in order to duel him again and win, he tries to reassemble the Millennium Puzzle, hoping to drag his spirit right back to the material plane. This ends up causing the villain of the movie to act, and almost leads to the end of the world. And does Kaiba learn his lesson and understand that some grudges aren't worth holding? Nope. He gets his affairs in order like he's about to die, and does exactly that. Not in the traditional way, mind you. Instead, he builds a machine that'll send him to the spirit world just so he can duel the Pharaoh again. He literally tears his soul from his body, sends it beyond the mortal plane to the ancient Egyptian afterlife, all so he can win a children's card game. If that isn't a disproportionate action to losing, I don't know what is. Honestly, I think that's my favourite part about a villain being petty. Being wantonly evil to everyone around you is one thing, but when your spite and bitterness is concentrated on one specific person, now that's the kind of deliciously hateful pettiness I crave. Take Black Manta for example. He quite literally exists to hate Aquaman. No, I'm not even kidding. When Aquaman died, Black Manta quit being a supervillain and opened a fish market to live a quiet, honest life. Then when he finds out Aquaman has come back from the dead, he goes full cray-cray, murders everyone around him, and throws on the old oval helmet so he can go straight back to villainy. Oh, and that's not even mentioning the fact that he killed Aquaman's infant son just to spite him, and throws that fact in Arthur's face any chance he can get. He killed a baby, and he feels zero remorse for the action just because it made Aquaman mad. The Shredder is another example of this. His hatred for Hamato Yoshi, aka Master Splinter, and by extension the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, is immense. In the 2012 cartoon series, he is so singularly obsessed with tormenting Splinter that when he finds out he's alive in New York, he moves the entire Foot Clan operation there from Japan to begin a campaign of revenge. He also kidnapped Splinter's infant daughter and raised her as his own, brainwashing her into hating every fiber of her true father's being.
My name is Karai. Father told me what you did to my mother, and now I'm going to return the favor.
The IDW continuity has a Shredder who holds just as much hatred, if not more, considering in this version, he and Hamato Yoshi originally lived centuries in the past in feudal Japan. Basically, Shredder is semi-immortal, and when Yoshi dies, he's reincarnated into the rat that eventually becomes Splinter via mutagen. It's a little complicated, but trust me, it makes sense in context. Anyway, this Shredder executed Yoshi and his 4 sons, who also happen to reincarnate into the turtles that become the TMNT. And in the present day, when he discovers that the mutant rat and turtles running around in modern day New York are his age-old enemies, he does everything he can to make sure their new life is one of suffering. He even borrows the same trick from his alternate continuity counterpart by brainwashing Leonardo and turning him against his father. The reason for all this in both universes? The girl Shredder liked married Yoshi instead of him. Literally one of the most childish, pathetic motivations possible created a truly terrifying, malevolent villain. And that is the final ingredient, malevolence. To me, the most perfectly petty villain is someone who does things for the most insignificant and downright idiotic reasons, but still manages to pull off being a frightful and fear-inducing force to be reckoned with. Egotistical, envious, overly obsessed individuals plagued by a number of insecurities and complexes, and yet they still command respect and inspire terror. In my eyes, there are 5 characters that represent the epitome of that. In no particular order, here they are. First, we have Lex Luthor. Now this guy will do anything to make Superman suffer, and I mean anything. And depending on which continuity you're looking at, it's either because of his ego and deep-seated inferiority complex forcing him to refuse to admit that a person as powerful as Superman can be so good, or it's because he burnt his hair off. I'll let you decide which one's more compelling. Anyway, he ran for president just to tick Superman off.
That's right, conspiracy buff. I spent $75 million on a fake presidential campaign. All just to tick Superman off.
He hired Toyman to blow up a daycare just so he could later engineer a scenario where Superman was forced to save a mass child murderer. He healed his own sister of her paralyzing illness, giving her back the use of her legs. For all of 10 seconds, before taking it away and stating that if she was to be re-cured, Superman would have to die. Hell, Lex even gave up godhood, just because one of the stipulations of gaining all that power was that he couldn't use it to kill Superman. And his pettiness didn't just extend to Superman, even though his focus and intensity was definitely on the Man of Steel. He framed Bruce Wayne for murder just because he cut all of Wayne Tech's military contracts with the US when Lex became president. He killed a female trainer he was sparring with just because she knocked him down and bruised his fragile masculinity. He gave people superpowers, then took them away when he found out the process wouldn't work on him, letting dozens fall to their death mid-flight. And perhaps most heinous, he stole 40 cakes. That's as many as 4 10s, and that is truly terrible. Next up is the Master, the personification of sadism fueled by an intense volcanic hatred for the Doctor. When he crossed paths with the 10th incarnation of the Doctor and ended up becoming supreme ruler of Earth, he kept the Doctor as a pet, routinely torturing him by disabling his biological immortality and forcing him to age the centuries that he'd been alive. When Martha and the Doctor finally managed to defeat him, the Master let himself die just to spite the Doctor and leave him as the last living Time Lord.
We're the only two left. There's no one else. Regenerate!
How about that? I win.
Him taking over Earth was also a way to spite the Doctor. He knew how much he cared for humans, so he turned their world into his own personal playground. He also kept Martha's family as his servants, which is... ooh, boy. Tortured Captain Jack and hunted Martha across the Earth for a year just to get his jollies. And that's just one incarnation. The Master has terrorized the Doctor and their allies over time and space for time immeasurable. Even after a heel turn to the side of the Angels, their wicked ways couldn't stay buried for long. Not when the pounding sound that is their hatred for the Doctor drowns out everything else.
Doctor. Master.
I like it when you use my name.
Call me by my name.
Master.
After that, we have Victor Von Doom. Like Lex and the Master before him, he has a singular obsession with a hated archenemy. Yup, Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, Doom's object of intense animosity. In his life, Doom has been an accomplished scientist, powerful sorcerer, ruler of a nation, feared supervillain, and god thrice over. All because of his desire to prove himself superior to Reed Richards, and he's lost it all more than once because of that same desire. In his pursuit to make Reed suffer, he's launched the Baxter Building into space, saved Reed's unborn daughter only to use her as a magical familiar, sent Reed's 8-year-old son to hell, and set his marriage on the date of Reed and Sue's anniversary. As you can see, Doom's obsession with Reed extends to his family. The biggest instance of this is when Molecule Man gave Doom his power to save the multiverse from the Beyonders. To do this, Doom stitched together what was left and ruled it as a god. And who did he make sure was by his side? A version of Reed's wife and kids, now his own. He also turned Reed's best friend into a living wall and his brother-in-law into an ever-screaming son. But I guess Johnny got his revenge in the end by sleeping with Doom's soon-to-be wife, a fact she revealed at quite possibly the worst possible moment. People, it should be a given that you don't cheat on your partners, but if you actually finally want to come clean, maybe don't do it during the wedding of the century while it's being televised in front of the entire world, and in doing so, embarrassing a man with an ego bigger than Galactus. Doom's pettiness also spills over to other characters in the Marvel Universe. He has a long-standing rivalry with the Black Panther, a character who's basically his heroic opposite, a super genius who's the ruler of a country and well-versed in sorcery. This is due to his envy over Wakanda's vibranium and T'Challa's romantic relationship with Storm. He also came to blows with Dr. Voodoo and eventually Clea when they were made Sorcerer Supreme instead of him. I mean, the guy threw one hell of a tantrum over being passed over for the title. Also, he refused to pay Luke Cage $200, and even though Luke kicked his butt for it, Doom ended up respecting him rather than loathing him. I guess above all else, Dr. Doom respects the hustle. But not when it comes to Reed. Nothing could ever make him respect any version of him. In fact, probably the most insane thing Doom has ever done in regards to his hatred of Reed is destroy an entire universe. Yes, you heard that right. Doom once went to a utopian universe where he'd solved all the world's problems, was happily married, and fulfilled in every facet of his life, all because he forgave and befriended Reed Richards. And what did the 616 Prime Doom do when he found this out? He destroyed that universe, because the very thought of forgiving Reed Richards made him sick to his stomach. And where, oh where, does this extreme visceral hatred stem from? When they were in college, Reed pointed out that the math in Doom's calculations was wrong. Doom didn't listen, and his experiment blew up in his face. And because his ego refused to allow him to admit that the great Victor Von Doom could possibly be wrong, he spent the rest of his life blaming Reed Richards. Petty as hell. After Doom, we have Dio Brando. Now Dio's pettiness is pretty straightforward. Due to a severe case of jealousy, he hates Jonathan Joestar, even though Jonathan's father adopted him and treated him like his own son. And how does Dio repay that kindness? By poisoning him. He then goes on to prove just how much he hates Jonathan by burning his dog alive, stealing his girlfriend's first kiss, and also becoming a vampire. All just to spit in Jonathan's eye. So strong is Dio's spite that he cut off his own head to escape defeat and went on to track down Jonathan, still as a head mind you, and steal his body, which he succeeds in doing. However, he does end up getting locked in a coffin underwater for almost a century. However, when he finally escapes, he goes right back to terrorizing the Joestar family, taking aim at Jonathan's descendants. In regards to being petty towards others, Dio also tends to use his stand the world and its time stop powers to just be a general dick. Not on the level of his dickishness towards the Joestars, however. Even in other universes, Dio's hatred for them persists. And now we come to our final prime example of pettiness. The Big Daddy of bitter rivalries. The Emperor of enmity. The once and future King of rancorous hatred. Eobard Thawne.
It was me, Barry.
If you know anything about Eobard, aka Professor Zoom, aka the Reverse Flash, then you knew this was coming. When it comes to singular hatred and petty acts of spite, Thawne has no equal. His drive to make Barry Allen's life a waking nightmare is unparalleled, especially because he does it at the cost of erasing his own existence. You see, the reason Eobard hates Barry so much is because he comes from the future, and in that future, he used to be the Flash's biggest fan. Unfortunately, he discovered that he was destined to be the Flash's worst enemy, and due to already not being of sound mind in the first place, he goes off the deep end and races to self-fulfill that prophecy at breakneck speed. In his campaign to be the Flash's greatest adversary, Eobard went back in time, killed Barry's mother, and framed his father for it. But that's not all he did to Barry's past. This dude, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, erased Barry's best friend from existence so that he'd have a lonely childhood and grow up socially isolated. He then used his super speed to continue to ruin his childhood. He ruined his Little League baseball game, he ruined his homework, he ruined his kneecaps by pushing him down the stairs, and by burning down his house and orchestrating events so that Barry's dog would get run over, he ruined his innocence. And if there was any scrap of it left, well, you know, the whole mother dying, father getting sent to jail thing kind of tore it to pieces. And all that is just stuff he did to kid Barry. When it comes to adult Barry, he's much more malevolent. He killed Barry's wife and has tried on several more occasions to murder Barry's loved ones, which usually leads to them becoming traumatized. He was ultimately the cause of Flashpoint due to being the one who actually went back in time and killed Barry's mother in the first place. And due to time travel, speed force, hypnotism shenanigans, Thawne impersonated Barry, turned his city and friends against him, then brought Barry's children from the future, turned them into villains, and made them fight their own father. And trust me when I say that's just the tip of the iceberg. Because the scariest thing about Thawne is that unlike other villains I've mentioned, he will direct his pettiness at others with the same intensity as his hatred for Barry. To get the attention of a girl he liked, he went back in time and erased every man she ever dated, and when she still refused to go out with him, he traumatized her into catatonia. He erased his own brother from existence just so that he'd be an only child, and also, you know, he kind of killed his parents. When he fought Batman, he destroyed the letter his father had written for him from the Flashpoint timeline, just to mock him. Then he went on to terrorize both Bruce Wayne Batman and Flashpoint Thomas Wayne Batman by transporting the latter to the former's universe. Why? Because nothing made Thomas Wayne sicker than knowing his son would grow up to be Batman, and Thawne took him to a world where that was a reality, just to really rub salt in the open wound that was his universe was never meant to exist. Circling back to the Flash family, Thawne makes a habit of ensuring he regularly menaces each and every one. He went back in time just to whisper in Jay Garrick's ear that he'd be forgotten, and mocked Wallace West, insisting he was a fake. But perhaps the worst thing Thawne did Flash family wise is engineer the disaster that was Heroes in Crisis. That's right, due to a retcon, Thawne is the reason Wally West had a breakdown, seemingly killed those people, and framed other heroes for the act. He's the reason Wally went into a downward spiral of suffering, all because it would hurt Barry Allen.
Why did you kill my mother?
Because I hate you. Not you now. You years from now.
In the future.
In a future, yes. We're enemies, rivals, opposites, reverses of one another.
We need to go back in time. To that night.
To do what?
You know what I need you to do.
Yeah. But I want to hear you say it.
I need you to kill my mother.
With pleasure.
I hate you.
And I hate you. And I sometimes wonder which of us is right.
Now I could go on and on about the frightful levels of pettiness a lot of other villains reach. I mean, the sheer length some of them will go to is both horrifying and hilarious. But I think I'll leave it at that. Lex, the Master, Doom, Dio, and Thorn are truly what I believe to be the pettiest of the petty. Arch enemies for the ages whose reigns of implausibly driven terror will remain immortalized for walking the fine line between petty and pathetic, all while being a joy for us to enjoy.